The invisible weight. You feel it even when everything looks fine. In those invisible moments, when no one is watching, when the world outside is quiet, something presses down on your chest. It steals your breath. It sets your mind spinning at a speed you never asked for. Sometimes it arrives without reason. No trigger, no warning. You simply wake up and it's already there, waiting. Other times, all it takes is the thought of tomorrow. You inhale deeply. You try to redirect your attention. You put on a face that says everything is under control. But somewhere inside, a quiet voice disagrees. Nothing is fine, and so the familiar cycle begins. You feel anxious. Then you feel anxious about feeling anxious. And on top of that, the guilt, the crushing weight of not being okay, of knowing you should be better, stronger, more composed than this. You were told this was a problem, that something in you was broken, that the anxiety needed to be fixed, managed, suppressed, medicated, away. Professionals handed you breathing techniques. Self-help gurus gave you productivity systems. Apps promised 7-minute meditations that would change your life. But what if the problem isn't the anxiety itself? What if anxiety is not a malfunction, but a message? In this video, we will not hand you another coping tool. We will not offer you a shortcut. What you're about to hear may feel uncomfortable at first, but discomfort, as you'll soon discover, is often the first sign that something real is about to change. Because perhaps no one has ever told you this. The restlessness you feel inside may not be a disorder. It may be a legitimate cry from your own consciousness, a signal that deserves not to be silenced, but to be understood. Alan Watts, the philosopher who spent his life translating Eastern wisdom into Western language, once said something that sounds contradictory on the surface, but carries a devastating truth at its core. The desire for security and the feeling of insecurity are the same thing. Let that land for a moment. The more urgently you try to establish emotional stability, the more unstable you feel. Because anxiety doesn't arise from danger, it arises from the refusal to accept that life is uncertain, unpredictable, and fundamentally beyond our control. We suffer not because the world is unsafe, but because we keep trying to make it safe in ways it was never designed to be. So let's pause here for a moment. What are you actually running from? Failure? Pain? Abandonment? The slow creeping certainty of death? Whatever it is, that thing you can't quite name, that fear you don't let yourself fully face, anxiety is the natural response to standing at the edge of it, and this is where biology enters the picture. Robert Sapolsky, one of the most respected neuroendocrinologists of our era, gave us a window into this process in his landmark work, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. His findings are both fascinating and deeply sobering. The stress system currently eating us alive from the inside, that racing heart, that shallow breath, that constant low-grade dread, was originally engineered for one purpose: physical survival. Our brains evolved on the African savanna, wired to respond to immediate, life-threatening danger. A predator emerges from the tall grass. Adrenaline floods the bloodstream. Muscles contract. The heart pounds. You run. And then the predator is gone. The system shuts down. The body returns to balance. That's how it was supposed to work. But here's what Sapolsky discovered. The human brain cannot distinguish between a lion charging across the plain and a notification on your smartphone, between a genuine physical threat and a thought about next month's mortgage payment, between real danger and imagined catastrophe. The alarm sounds the same. So when you lie awake at 2 a.m. rehearsing a difficult conversation you haven't had yet, your body is responding exactly as it would if a predator were crouched outside your tent. Cortisol surges, muscles tighten, your immune system suppresses, digestion halts. You are not overreacting. You are an ancient biological machine trying to navigate a world it was never built for. The tragedy is that this response used to be short, acute. It would spike and fall. But in the modern world, the threats never quite go away. The inbox is never empty. The news cycle never ends. The social comparisons never stop. The financial pressures never fully resolve. So the alarm keeps sounding day after day, week after week, until what was once a life-saving mechanism becomes a life-draining prison. And still, we blame ourselves. Why am I so sensitive? Why can't I just relax? What is wrong with me? Nothing. Absolutely nothing is wrong with you. You are operating exactly as evolution designed. The mechanism is functioning perfectly. The world it's running in. That's the mismatch. But here is where we need to stop and ask the real question. What if instead of fighting these responses, we learn to listen to them? What if instead of viewing anxiety as a defect to be corrected, we saw it as a deeply human signal, pointing towards something we've been avoiding, something we urgently need to understand? What if that's where everything changes? If what you've heard so far has touched something real in you, I want to ask you something. Subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment below. Because in this space, you are not alone. Your voice, a single sentence from your own experience, might become the light that guides someone else through their darkest moment. This video speaks to those who are exhausted from fighting themselves, to those who have tried everything: therapy, meditation, medication, journaling, exercise, cold showers, and still the emptiness expands, the weight returns. We're going to approach anxiety from a direction you may never have been shown before, not as an enemy, not as a chemical imbalance, but as a mirror, a symptom, a teacher. And from that perspective, something, maybe everything, can begin to shift. Are you ready? Because after this point, you will never be able to look at your anxiety the same way again. The wisdom in insecurity. There is a particular kind of anxiety that thrives in the information age. It doesn't come from lack. It comes from abundance. It doesn't arrive because you know too little. It arrives because you know too much. Because you can know, at any given moment, exactly how unstable the world is. You can read about geopolitical crises before your morning coffee. You can track economic collapse in real time. You can watch other people's curated highlight reels and feel the quiet devastation of inadequacy wash over you before you've even gotten out of bed. This is a modern problem without a biological precedent. Alan Watts called it the trap of the over-informed mind. The more data we consume, the less capable we feel of making decisions. The more options we have, the more paralyzed we become, because the rational mind believes that if it can just gather enough information, if it can just model every possible outcome, it can manufacture certainty in an inherently uncertain universe. It cannot. And deep in the body, we already know this. We have become, without realizing it, addicted to control. We want to know what comes next. We want to predict the trajectory of our careers, our relationships, our health, our sense of self. We have mistaken the map for the territory and then panicked when the territory refused to match. Watts was blunt about this. He observed that the modern human mind lives as a ghost, haunting the past, obsessively haunting the future, and perpetually absent from the only moment where life actually occurs: now. We are always one step ahead of ourselves, always in the next plan, the next problem, the next threat, always preparing for a disaster that may or may not arrive. And while we're busy preparing, life, actual life, in all its texture and surprise and fleeting beauty, slips past unnoticed, because life only happens in the present, not in the past, which is gone, not in the future, which hasn't arrived. Only here, only now, only in this exact breath you are taking. And the more we refuse to accept this, the more we insist on anchoring ourselves to what was or what might be, the tighter the tension grows. The more the body protests, the nature of reality is change, flow, impermanence. Everything transforms, every structure eventually dissolves, every relationship changes, every identity you've built around who you think you are is subject to revision. The river you stood in yesterday is made of different water today. This is not a tragedy. This is the fundamental nature of existence. But when we begin to fight this reality, when we erect elaborate scaffolding to hold everything in place, to keep things predictable, to guarantee outcomes, we set ourselves up for collapse. Because the scaffolding always falls, not because we've failed, but because the river was always going to move. The desire for security and the feeling of insecurity are the same thing. This paradox sits at the very heart of chronic anxiety. We suffer not from what is real, but from our desperate attempt to deny what is real. We want to stop the river. We want to freeze the moment. We want to know that the people we love won't leave, that our health won't fail, that our work will remain meaningful, that the ground beneath us won't shift. But the ground always shifts. Watts once wrote that the more we try to plan life, the more we recede from the actual living of it. Because life only reveals itself to those who are willing to be in it, not those who are busy managing it from a distance. Anxiety is not caused by reality. It is caused by the refusal to accept reality. The chaos outside is real. The uncertainty is real. But the suffering, that comes from the story we build around it. The insistence that things should be different from what they are. Now let's layer in what Sapolsky contributes to this picture. The stress response system, Sapolsky demonstrates, was built for acute moments of danger. Acute, meaning short, meaning the antelope on the savannah either escapes or doesn't. Either way, the episode ends, the cortisol dissipates, the body repairs. But now imagine a different scenario. No lion, no physical threat at all. Instead, a thought. What if I lose my job? What if my partner stops loving me? What if the diagnosis comes back positive? What if I'm not enough? The amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, doesn't analyze the source of the signal. It simply responds to the signal. And so the exact same cascade begins. Cortisol floods the bloodstream, the heart rate climbs, the digestive system halts, the immune system retreats, the muscles prepare to fight or flee. But there's nothing to fight, nothing to flee from. The threat is entirely cognitive, and yet the body treats it as mortal. This is the most tragic dimension of modern anxiety. The threat never ends, not because the world never becomes safe, but because the mind keeps generating new threats the moment the old ones resolve. It is a factory running at full capacity, producing dangers around the clock, and the body, loyal, obedient, literal, responds each time as if the danger is real. Sapolsky's research documents what this sustained activation costs. The immune system degrades. Cardiovascular risk climbs. Digestion becomes chronic. Hormonal systems collapse. Reproductive function diminishes. Sleep architecture fractures. Memory consolidation falters. The body was not designed to sustain this level of activation over years of time. And here we arrive at the question that changes everything. If anxiety is both a philosophical refusal of reality and a biological system misfiring in a manufactured environment, what do we do? Not cope, not suppress, not manage, understand. Because the path out is not around it. The path out is through it. In the next section, we will explore what it means to stop treating anxiety as the enemy and begin treating it as the most honest voice in the room. When anxiety speaks, are you listening? For many of us, anxiety has become more than a feeling. It has become a way of life. The knot in the stomach before the alarm goes off, the racing thoughts that arrive the moment the room goes quiet, the low hum of dread that follows us through the day, disappearing briefly when we're distracted, returning the moment the distraction lifts. We have tried everything to make it stop, and still it returns. What if the problem is not the anxiety, but what we do with it? We were taught, by culture, by medicine, by well-meaning people who loved us, to fight it, to push it down, to override it with willpower, or drown it out with noise. We were taught that feeling anxious was a sign of weakness, of instability, of something fundamentally wrong with our inner architecture. But what if the exact opposite is true? What if anxiety, in its raw and undistorted form, is one of the most honest and intelligent processes happening inside you? Consider what anxiety actually does. It rises when something is wrong, not always externally wrong, but internally wrong. It rises when the life you're living on the surface no longer matches the life your deeper self knows to be true. It rises when you've been saying yes when you mean no, when you've been performing a version of yourself that has nothing to do with who you actually are. Every day, most of us play roles. We perform competence. We perform contentment. We perform certainty. We walk into rooms and project a curated version of ourselves, confident, measured, unshakable, while something beneath the surface churns in quiet protest. The soul knows the truth. And when the truth is not being lived, when the inner world and the outer world are misaligned, the soul does not go silent. It gets louder, it sends signals, it turns up the volume on discomfort until the noise becomes impossible to ignore. That is anxiety, not a malfunction, an alarm, an honest, insistent, sometimes exhausting alarm, but an alarm pointing at something real. Alan Watts located the source of most psychological suffering in exactly this gap. He wrote that we manufacture our own torment through the friction between who we genuinely are and the false identity we perform for the world. We want to be seen as strong, so we bury our fear. We want to appear successful, so we never let anyone see us fail. We want to be loved, so we shape ourselves into whoever seems most likely to be accepted, and this performance requires enormous energy. It requires constant vigilance, constant editing, constant monitoring. You must remember which version of yourself you presented to which person. You must keep the story consistent. You must never slip, never contradict yourself, never let the mask slip far enough that someone might catch a glimpse of the person beneath it. This is exhausting in a way that sleep cannot fix, and eventually, it breaks. The breaking looks different for different people. For some, it's a panic attack in a supermarket. For others, it's a slow, creeping numbness that settles in over years. For some, it's rage. For others, it's withdrawal. For some, it arrives as the inability to feel anything at all. But in every case, the message is the same. I cannot sustain this any longer. Robert Sapolsky approaches the same truth from the biological direction. The stress response, he explains, serves a protective function. Its entire evolutionary purpose is to alert the organism to threat. When it becomes chronic, when the alarm sounds without end, it's not because the system is broken. It's because the signal has been suppressed so many times that the system has had to escalate. When you keep telling your body to be quiet, it doesn't go quiet. It gets louder. The body is extraordinarily creative in its persistence. Skin eruptions, digestive collapse, insomnia, headaches, hormonal disruption. It will be heard. The question is only whether you will listen before or after it forces you to stop. And this opens up an entirely different way of relating to anxiety, one that most therapeutic models don't quite reach. What if you stopped trying to eliminate anxiety and started getting curious about it? What is it pointing at? Where in your life are you living in contradiction to your own values? Where have you agreed to something your deepest self never consented to? Anxiety tends to cluster around specific territories. For one person, it may circle endlessly around work. For another, it might orbit relationships, because they learned long ago that love was conditional. For another still, it might be diffuse, ambient, present everywhere, because the entire architecture of their life was built on other people's expectations. Listen carefully. Not with analysis. That's the mind doing what it always does, turning the experience into a problem to be solved. But with simple, direct attention. What if you offered it the one thing it has never received from you? Your presence. Watts called this radical attention. Not management, not therapy, not technique. Simply the willingness to turn toward what you've been turning away from, and to stay there, without flinching, without fixing, without the need to resolve it before you can continue. Because here is the paradox that changes everything. The moment you stop fighting anxiety, you stop feeding it. Not by suppressing it, not by ignoring it, but by meeting it with open, stable attention, the kind that doesn't need the feeling to go away in order to be okay, the kind that can say, "I see you, I'm not afraid of you, tell me what you know." This is not resignation, this is not passivity, this is one of the most courageous acts available to a human being. It's not, "You are about to fall apart." It's, "Something here is not right for you." It's not, "You are broken." It's, "You have been pretending too long." It's not, "You are in danger." It's time to be honest. This is the shift, and listening, as it turns out, is where the transformation begins. Returning to the body, where healing lives. The mind is a remarkable instrument. It reasons, plans, predicts, creates. It has built civilizations and composed symphonies and mapped the human genome. But there is one thing the mind, for all its brilliance, cannot do. It cannot give you peace. Peace is not a thought. It is not a conclusion you arrive at after sufficient analysis. It is not the reward for finally solving the equation of your life. It is not something the intellect can manufacture through sheer determination. Here is something most people don't realize about anxiety. It begins in the mind, but it does not stay there. Within seconds of its arrival, it has migrated into the body. Your shoulders rise and stiffen, your jaw clenches, your diaphragm tightens, your bowels respond, your hands become cold. Anxiety is not abstract, it is thoroughly physical, which means that healing, genuine healing, must be physical too. You cannot think your way out of a feeling that lives in your muscles, your nervous system, your gut. Trying to reason with anxiety from inside the mind is like trying to cool a fire by studying the chemistry of combustion. Understanding is necessary but not sufficient. The secret of life is to be completely engaged with what you are doing in the here and now, not thinking about what you did or what you're going to do. Alan Watts. This is not mere philosophy, it is a physiological instruction. The mind's nature is to analyze, the body's nature is to experience, and experience, direct, unmediated, present-moment experience, is where the cycle of anxiety can finally be interrupted. The autonomic nervous system has two primary modes. The sympathetic mode, fight or flight, is the one anxiety hijacks. When activated, it redirects energy to survival functions, heart rate up, breath shallow, muscles primed, digestion suspended. The parasympathetic mode, rest and digest, is its counterpart. It's where the body repairs, restores, processes. It's where sleep happens, where digestion happens, where immune function is maintained. Most chronically anxious people are living almost entirely in sympathetic dominance. The parasympathetic system is technically present, but it has been so rarely activated that the body has forgotten how to find it. The good news is this: you can access it deliberately, not through willpower, not through thinking, through breath, specifically through extended exhalation. When you breathe in, you mildly activate the sympathetic system. When you breathe out, you activate the vagus nerve, the primary highway of the parasympathetic system, and you signal to the entire nervous system. The threat is over. We are safe. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable, reproducible physiology. A slow exhale, longer than the inhale, directly reduces cortisol levels. It lowers heart rate. It reduces muscle tension. When you are anxious, you breathe shallowly and quickly. When you breathe slowly and deeply, you become less anxious. Not immediately, not completely, but measurably, reliably, bodily. This is not a trick. This is biology. But there is something even deeper than the breath. Something Watts described as open awareness, the willingness to notice what is happening in your body without the need to change any of it. When anxiety rises, the typical response is immediate and automatic. Push it away, change the subject, check the phone, pour a drink. Do anything except actually be with the feeling. What if instead you simply stayed? Is the feeling heavy or light, tight or expansive? Does it pulse or sit still? You'll notice something remarkable when you do this. The anxiety doesn't necessarily disappear, but it stops escalating, because escalation is what happens when anxiety meets resistance. But when you turn toward the feeling with open, non-judgmental attention, you interrupt the loop. You send a different signal. There is no emergency here. I am not in danger from this feeling. I can be with it. And then something extraordinary occurs. The feeling, meeting no resistance, begins to move, not away, through. Feelings get stuck only when they are chronically suppressed, when they are never allowed to complete their natural arc. The body was not designed to store every unprocessed emotion indefinitely. It was designed to feel, respond, and return to equilibrium. We have disrupted that cycle. Restoring it requires something counterintuitive. Less control, not more. Movement, social connection, sleep, and direct exposure to natural environments. Sapolsky's research is unambiguous on all of these. They are not luxuries, they are physiological necessities, and they work not because they distract you from your anxiety, but because they return you to your body, which is where the anxiety actually lives and where the healing must actually occur. The mind has been driving the car for so long that the body has forgotten it's even a passenger. Returning to the body is not a technique, it is a reunification, a homecoming, and here, it turns out, is enough. The false self and the war within. There is a conversation happening inside every anxious person that rarely gets named. It's not between you and the world. It's between you and yourself. More precisely, it's between who you actually are and who you've decided you have to be. Very early in life, most of us learn a fundamental lesson about the world. Love is conditional. Not because our caregivers necessarily intended to teach us this, but because all caregivers are human, and humans are inconsistent. And the child, who cannot yet understand the complexity of adult psychology, draws the most logical conclusion available. The warmth comes when I behave in certain ways. The withdrawal comes when I behave in others. Therefore, to secure the warmth, I must become the version of myself that produces it. This is the birth of the false self. Not a lie, exactly. not a deliberate performance, but an adaptation, a survival strategy, a very intelligent response to an unpredictable environment. The problem is that most of us carry this adaptation into adulthood entirely intact, and then spend the rest of our lives performing it for audiences who were never actually asked for it. We keep auditioning for roles we were already cast in. We keep shrinking ourselves to fit rooms we could have simply walked out of. Watts described this with unusual precision. He wrote that the psychological suffering most people experience is not caused by the world treating them badly, but by the continuous internal warfare of maintaining a self that isn't real, because the false self requires constant maintenance. It has to be defended against contradiction. It has to be upgraded as the social context changes. This is not living. This is administration, and no amount of administration can replicate the relief of simply being. The anxiety that accompanies this kind of life is not incidental. It is structural. It is baked into the architecture. Because on some level you always know the performance isn't real. On some level you always sense the gap between what you're showing and what you're feeling. And that gap, that persistent, nagging awareness that something isn't true, generates anxiety as reliably as a wound generates pain. The pain is not the problem. The wound is, and the wound in this case is the belief that who you actually are, unedited, unperformed, fully honest, is not acceptable. This belief is almost universally untrue, but it is extraordinarily common, extraordinarily persistent, and extraordinarily destructive. Sapolsky's research illuminates the biological cost of chronic social stress, and the effort of maintaining a false identity is, at its root, a form of social stress. You are constantly monitoring how you are perceived. The brain doesn't know that the threat is imaginary, it only knows that there is a performance to maintain, and failure would be catastrophic. So the alarm stays on, the cortisol stays elevated, the muscles stay tense. What would it mean to put down that war? Watts called this the original face, borrowing from Zen Buddhism the idea that beneath every layer of constructed identity there is a self that was never divided, never at war, never in need of proof. You cannot think your way to this self. You cannot earn your way to it or perform your way to it, but you can return to it. And the path of return begins with the willingness to notice, just notice, when you are performing versus when you are being, not to judge the performance, not to eliminate it overnight, just to see it clearly, because what you can see, you can eventually choose. That person is the answer. Anxiety as a teacher, the radical reframe. We have spent a great deal of time exploring what anxiety is, where it comes from, and what it costs us. Now it's time to ask a different question entirely. Not, how do I get rid of this? But, what is this trying to show me? When anxiety arrives, and it will arrive because you are human and the world is uncertain, most people experience it as an interruption, a problem, an unwelcome guest that needs to be dealt with before life can proceed. What if it is not an interruption? What if it is, in fact, the message? Consider the circumstances under which anxiety tends to spike most sharply. It is rarely in the middle of genuine flow, those moments when you are fully engaged, fully present, doing something that feels aligned with who you actually are. It tends to spike when you are about to do something that violates your own values, when you are about to say yes to something your soul says no to, when the gap between who you are and who you're pretending to be has stretched to its breaking point. In other words, anxiety spikes precisely when it most needs to be heard. It is trying to save you. It is trying to pull you back from a direction that will cost you more than you know. It is trying to tell you that something in your life needs to change. Not the anxiety, but the conditions that are producing it. Watts made this point with characteristic sharpness. He observed that most people respond to psychological discomfort the way they would respond to a fire alarm, by covering their ears. The alarm isn't the problem, the fire is. What does your anxiety keep pointing at? There is a map here. It's just written in a language most people were never taught to read. The language of sensation, the language of resistance, the language of the body pushing back against what the mind has already rationalized. When you learn to read this map, when you start treating every spike of anxiety not as a malfunction, but as a navigation signal, your relationship to anxiety changes fundamentally. It stops being an enemy and starts being an ally, a demanding ally, an inconvenient ally, an ally that doesn't particularly care whether you're comfortable when it delivers its message, but an ally nonetheless. When anxiety arrives, instead of the familiar cascade, dread, suppression, shame, secondary anxiety about the anxiety, you have access to a different response, a curious one. You can pause. You can turn toward the feeling. You can ask, with genuine openness, what is this about? This capacity, genuine emotional resilience, is built not by avoiding difficult feelings, but by repeatedly meeting them and discovering that you can survive them. Resilience is not the absence of feeling. Resilience is the capacity to be fully moved and return. Each time you turn toward your anxiety instead of running from it, you are performing a small but significant act of self-trust. You are building evidence, physical, experiential, undeniable evidence, that you can handle what arises. Sapolsky's research contributes something vital here as well. Individuals who are able to interpret stressful events as meaningful rather than merely threatening show measurably lower baseline cortisol levels, faster recovery from acute stress, and significantly better long-term health outcomes. The interpretation matters, not just cognitively, but biologically. Tell yourself a different story about what anxiety means, and the body, over time, begins to respond differently. It doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're awake. The peace that isn't on the other side. There is a fantasy that most anxious people carry. It sounds like this. Once I solve this problem, once this situation resolves, once I get through this particular difficulty, then I'll be okay. Then I'll be able to rest. Then I'll be able to breathe. The problem with this fantasy is not that the situations don't eventually resolve. They do. And then new situations arrive. The peace you're looking for does not live on the other side of your circumstances. It lives here. It lives now. It lives inside this breath, this moment, this sensation of being alive in a body that is doing its imperfect, magnificent best to carry you through the world. But here is the paradox that makes this both beautiful and terrifying. The peace that lives here cannot be found by looking for it. Watts returned to this paradox again and again in dozens of books and lectures because he understood that it was the crux of everything. The moment you begin searching for peace, you are implicitly affirming that you don't have it. You cannot be truly comfortable in your own skin as long as you are trying to be comfortable in your own skin. Alan Watts. The trying is the problem, not because effort is bad, but because the kind of effort directed at controlling your inner state misunderstands the nature of inner experience entirely. The moment you stop trying to have peace and simply allow yourself to be exactly as you are, anxious, uncertain, unresolved, human, something extraordinary tends to happen. The pressure drops, not because the anxiety has disappeared, but because the second layer, the anxiety about the anxiety, the demand that you be different from what you are, that layer lifts. This is not enlightenment. This is not the end of difficulty. It is something simpler and more available. Permission. Permission to be exactly where you are. exactly as you are, without the additional burden of needing to be somewhere else or some other way. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust and wrote Man's Search for Meaning, arrived at a similar conclusion from a very different direction. He observed that those who retained a sense of meaning, even in the most extreme conditions of suffering imaginable, had a survival advantage that was not merely psychological but physiological. Meaning is not decoration. Meaning is medicine. Your anxiety is not pointless. Your restlessness is not arbitrary. The very fact that you are still here, still asking these questions, still reaching for understanding, that is evidence of something remarkable in you, not despite your anxiety, but through it. Living from the inside out, we have traveled a long way in this conversation. We began with a chest that tightens for no apparent reason, with a mind that won't slow down, with the familiar exhaustion of a life in which something always seems slightly wrong, even when everything appears to be fine. And now we arrive here, not at an answer, at an orientation, because this is not the kind of conversation that ends with a solution. It's the kind that ends with a direction. What does it mean to live from the inside out? It means making decisions from your actual values rather than from fear of disapproval. It means building a life that reflects who you are rather than who you've been told you should be. It means choosing relationships, work, and daily practices based on what genuinely sustains you. None of this is simple. None of it happens overnight, and none of it is linear. You will move forward and then backward, understand something deeply, and then lose your grip on it, find clarity, and then find yourself in the fog again. This is not failure. This is the actual texture of genuine growth. What does a practice look like? Not a rigid set of prescriptions, but a daily, gentle, honest return to a few fundamental questions. What am I feeling right now? Not, what should I be feeling? What am I actually feeling? Where in my body does it live? Can I locate it? Can I breathe into it without immediately needing it to change? What is the feeling pointing at? Am I living in alignment with what I actually value? Where have I been dishonest recently? With others, but more importantly, with myself. These are not comfortable questions, but comfort, as we've established by now, is not the goal. The goal is aliveness. Anxiety, it turns out, is one of the most reliable invitations to that engagement, because anxiety refuses the performance. It breaks through the surface. It insists on being heard. The anxiety is not the enemy. The avoidance of the anxiety is the enemy. The story you've been told, that feeling this way means you are broken, that you need to be fixed before you can be loved, that story is false. You are not broken. You are in the process of waking up, and waking up is uncomfortable. It requires the dismantling of structures that felt safe. It requires the willingness to not know. But on the other side of that discomfort, not as a destination, but as a way of moving, is something that no amount of suppression or management ever produced. A life that is genuinely yours. The invitation, a world that doesn't have to end you. The world, right now, is objectively chaotic. This is not a matter of perspective. The geopolitical landscape is genuinely unstable. The economic systems that underpin daily life are under genuine strain. The information environment is genuinely overwhelming. The loneliness epidemic is genuinely documented. The mental health crisis is genuinely global. You are not imagining the difficulty, but here is what we have been slowly building toward this entire time. The chaos outside does not have to determine the state inside. This is not a denial of external reality. It is the recognition of something that human beings across cultures, centuries, and circumstances have arrived at independently, Through philosophy, through science, through spiritual practice, through the simple lived experience of having survived something that was supposed to break them. The Stoics of ancient Rome understood this. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most powerful men in the Western world for nearly 2 decades, ruled over an empire that was almost constantly under some form of crisis. He returned again and again to a single principle: I cannot control what happens. I can only choose how I meet it. Viktor Frankl arrived at the same place from a very different direction, from the systematic destruction of everything a human being can lose. In the concentration camps, he discovered that the last and most fundamental human freedom is the freedom to choose one's response to any given situation. This freedom, he wrote, cannot be taken away. And the Buddhist traditions, spanning 2.5 millennia across Asia, have been mapping the same territory from yet another direction: the capacity to remain stable in the presence of both pleasure and pain, both success and failure, without being capsized by any of it. The world may be chaotic. Your mind, your inner world, does not have to be. This is not something you install. It is not a state you achieve once and maintain indefinitely. It is a practice. The chaos will continue. The uncertainty will not resolve. But you have something now that you perhaps didn't have when you arrived at this video. A different relationship to what arises inside you, not immunity, not invincibility, but the growing understanding that what you feel is not the final word on who you are, that the anxiety is a signal, not a sentence, that the restlessness is a call, not a condemnation, that beneath all of it, beneath the fear and the performance and the exhaustion of the maintaining, there is something in you that was never at war, something that was never broken, something that has been waiting for you to stop running long enough to notice it. Closing, the beginning. You may feel like we have arrived at the end, but perhaps everything is only now beginning. The restlessness you have felt your entire life, it has not been evidence of your inadequacy. It has been evidence of your sensitivity, your depth, your refusal, somewhere beneath all the conditioning, to simply accept a diminished version of your own life. Anxiety is not comfortable. Living authentically is not comfortable either, especially at first, especially when you are dismantling structures that have kept you safe for years. But the discomfort of growth is categorically different from the discomfort of suppression. One opens, the other closes. Alan Watts spent decades trying to help Western minds understand what Eastern philosophy had been articulating for millennia: that the suffering we think is caused by the world is almost always caused by our resistance to the world, that the peace we think we must travel to is available here in this moment, without traveling anywhere. Robert Sapolsky spent decades demonstrating in rigorous biological detail what the body costs when the mind refuses to let go, what suppression looks like inside a cell, what the body of someone who has never been allowed to rest actually looks like at the level of cortisol and inflammation and immune function. Together, they point to the same door. The door is not out there. It is here. It is accessible in this moment. And the key is nothing more or less than your own honest attention, turned inward, turned toward what is actually here, turned toward the full, unedited, unremarkable, and magnificent reality of being this particular human being, in this particular body, on this particular day. Before you close this video, I want to ask you something. Not to analyze, not to immediately translate into a plan or an action item, just this. What did you feel while you were watching? Was there something that landed differently? A sentence that felt like it was written specifically for you? A moment of recognition so precise it was almost uncomfortable? That sensation, that moment of being seen, is important, because it means there is something in you that already knows, something that has been waiting for permission to be acknowledged. That something is you, the real you, not the curated version, not the managing version, not the version that is always one more self-improvement project away from being okay. The one who was always already okay. The world is chaotic, the news will remain alarming, the uncertainty will not resolve. And through all of it, underneath all of it, there is this quiet, this groundedness, this presence. It was never lost. You simply stopped looking in the right place. If something in this video shifted something in you, leave a comment below. Not a summary of what you learned, but what you felt, what you remembered, what you're ready to do differently. Because your words, shared honestly, become the light someone else is searching for. The world may be chaotic. Your mind doesn't have to be.